Hey guys, thanks for coming out. I'm going to start. We have 3 panelists, and we're going to try to get through these pretty quickly so we have some time for Q&A. So I'm Jonathan Schenker, and I created Quiver, which is a cooperative multiplayer archery-based castle defense game for the HTC Vive and Oculus Rift on Steam. Today, I'm going to be talking about creating a multiplayer VR game by yourself and the lessons I've learned from doing so in Quiver. Just a quick overview. I'll first discuss some of the benefits of implementing multiplayer early on. I'll talk about some of the technical tricks for testing multiplayer functionality by yourself. And I'll outline some steps that you can take to iterate efficiently once your systems are working. And then finally, I'll give some tips on handling a multiplayer community of VR early adopters. So first, let's talk about why you should start doing multiplayer development early on. Implementing a multiplayer system is really difficult. There are a lot of things to think about, and a lot of planning is necessary. But I promise that however difficult it may be to begin the task of implementing multiplayer, if you don't start early, you absolutely will have to rebuild a ton of your systems because you built them early on and they don't work in multiplayer. This advice is a little bit less useful for games that you know are going to be purely competitive multiplayer that have only multiplayer systems in them. But I found that the best way to implement multiplayer myself is that you want to build it side by side with your single-player systems. If you have to have a gun that shoots bullets, you can spend the extra 3 minutes to build a multiplayer synchronization method instead of coming back later once you're done and you've moved on from that system and try to relearn, oh, how did this work? And then try to build multiplayer in, because that can easily introduce a lot of bugs. So, speaking of bugs, let's talk about how to test multiplayer features by yourself. In traditional games, multiplayer testing isn't really a big deal to do by yourself because you can open up 2 windows at the same time. Unfortunately, you can't put on 2 headsets. So what I've found to be the most effective is to build tools to help you test multiplayer. That way, you can use the headset in one instance, build another instance, and use your keyboard to control that second instance of the game. Your keyboard is still connected to the game, to your computer. It has tons of keys. You really want to use it. Unity makes it super easy to do a bunch of dev tools by yourself really quickly. You can use the if Unity editor features, build in systems, use Unity events to create super generic systems to rebind keys to whatever you want them to do. Just really try to lean on some of the tools that are available. Use the asset store. There are tons of testing suites available, and they will really help you out in the long run. Spend a bit of money to just build out some tools to make your life easier and make you much more efficient at testing. The other thing is that all features aren't created equal, so don't get bogged down building advanced tools for a niche feature when you could spend that time either building tools for generic things to help test everything, or tools that help you really test game-critical features. So let's skip forward to a released game, either a demo, private beta, early access, however you get it out there. You want to iterate quickly. If you know that you're going to need to add a feature, just suck it up and do it. It'll usually take longer if you postpone it because the systems will need to be adjusted that you already have in the game. Right now, I'm in the process of changing Quiver from a static map to a fully procedural multiplayer map system. It's a huge undertaking, but I know that it's necessary for the game's replayability and to keep players engaged. So, and because that's such a core idea to the game, you just kind of have to do it. If you introduce a bug that breaks the game, and it will happen, you just need to fix it immediately. I don't care if it's the weekend. It's not about owing it to a player who potentially spent money. It's about sending a message that you really care about your game. Once your game's out in the wild, especially if you want a community to grow from it, you need to treat it like it's the most important thing to you. And then speaking of growing a community, once you actually start to generate one, how is it possible to manage it by yourself? So I've actually found it to be pretty simple. First, you need to be available. These are early adopters, and they absolutely want you to succeed. Demonstrate that you value them by being visible. Respond to questions and requests, regardless of the nature. And if someone asks you to implement swords for your archery game, don't just dismiss them. Explain the direction your game is going and why it might not fit with the overall vision. This community is absolutely too small to start dismissing people. I've seen many times in a number of games that where the developers have dismissed people and it's led to creating a lifelong enemy, and independent developers cannot afford to do that. You also should be listening and reading to everything said about your game. If someone took the time to write something down, you better be willing to read it. Negative feedback means that they care enough to say something about the game and voice their dissatisfaction. If they didn't give ideas for how to fix something, ask for them. There's a fantastic GDC talk by Sid Meier about getting useful information from any type of feedback from any type of person. It's free for anyone to view on the GDC Vault, and I highly recommend going to watch it because it's completely shaped how I interact with the community. And finally, you need to handle issues immediately. If you make a mistake, potentially forget to add a social feature that leads to players being able to be harassed, don't throw blame, don't point fingers. Acknowledge the issue and explain how you're going to fix it. Don't explain why it happened. Nobody really cares, and it makes you seem insincere. Just act. If it's a serious issue, drop what you're working on and handle it. I promise that no one will remember if you delay adding a cool new player ability, but they might remember a responsive developer, and it could get you noticed by a lot more people. So, those are my tips for making a VR multiplayer game by yourself. Does it seem daunting? Good, it should. Otherwise, everybody would be making one. But I absolutely guarantee that the reward is well worth the trouble.
Hi, everybody. My name is Vicki Ferguson, and I'm the lead programmer on Eagle Flight. Eagle Flight's a VR game that was released last fall. I'm just wondering how many people here have tried it. Cool. OK, I'm going to just talk a little bit about it for context for people that haven't tried it yet. We have multiple modes in Eagle Flight. Basically, the story is you're an eagle, and you're flying over the city of Paris. So we have a story mode where you're a little baby eaglet, and then you eventually work your way up to being king of the city. We also have our free flight mode where you can just sort of experience the thrill of flight. And then we have multiplayer, which is obviously what I'm here to talk to you about today. So here's a glimpse at our multiplayer gaming. Oops. So that's the game. As you can see, there's this delicious rabbit that you're all going for, and you're trying to grab it and take it back to your nest to feed your baby eaglets. But you have to contend with this other team that's also trying to do the same thing. It's a really simple mechanic, but it's pretty fun. So in order to take out the other team, you have this screech wave, which is just like a sonic wave that you shoot out of your mouth, because obviously that's what eagles do. And your opponent will disappear in a cloud of feathers and drop the prey. So what's important about this is that you have a limited shoot speed, because the focus of our game is really about navigation and about flight. So this encourages players to sort of dive into the city and weave in between buildings and trees, trying to lose people. It's this World War II plane-style like dogfighting. We also have an echo shield, which will allow you to protect yourself from one shot. What this means is people often use it right when they're going to deliver things to the nest, because that's when you have to actually escape the city and expose yourself in the open. So the mechanics are, again, really simple. We wanted to keep it almost like a sport. So everyone understands the rules, but it's actually takes a bit of skill to master. So given the game, I'm going to give you some tips for a successful VR multiplayer game. The first tip is to allow the game to be played with as few people as possible. We all know that there are not very many headsets in the wild right now. So although our game is designed for 3 versus 3, we also allow play with fewer players. So you can play 2 versus 2 if you want, 2 versus 1 if you're really good, even 1 versus 1 if you want to get into a match right away. So the reason we chose 3 versus 3, and we actually tested with more players, but it starts to get really confusing because shots are flying everywhere, you don't really know what's happening. And 3 is kind of perfect because it allows these natural roles to emerge. So one player is going for the prey, another player is right behind them trying to protect them, and then you've got a sniper in the distance who's taking out the enemies. Definitely another way to get people into multiplayer as quickly as possible is having these short but intense rounds. So we actually made our round time available to us to change on the server side to make sure we could adjust it based on the community and the community feedback. 4 minutes is about the right amount of time for this super intense gameplay, but because it's in VR and because it's intense, you want to make sure that players have a break afterwards, so 4 minutes was kind of the sweet spot for us. It also brings you back to the lobby quicker so that other players can join the game. So while they're in the lobby, you want to make sure that they have something to do. Because it's actually really annoying to be sitting waiting for other players with a headset on, because you can't do anything else, right? It's not like you can look around, do stuff on your desk, or walk away because you won't be in VR anymore. So what we did is we actually synced the Eagle heads to the VR headsets. So we developed this, so you can see the other players, you can see where they're looking, you can have this natural language start to emerge where you can be like, yeah, good game, dude. And you can also tell really easily when people are away from the keyboard because their neck is kind of off at this really weird angle. One thing we don't talk about too much is our free flight mode. It's actually passive multiplayer. So while you're just sort of zenning out, flying through the city, you're actually joining you with other players who are doing the same thing. But because we wanted it to be this Zen-like experience, we wanted to make sure that those other players couldn't affect your experience too much. You can see them flying around, but you can't see any shots that they fire, or you can't hear them. It's kind of like a journey experience. Like you can actually find people and fly together, but there's not really much they can do to harass you. And that's the other thing that I thought was worth talking about, just because it's a hot topic in VR right now, and it's something that we really need to address, is how do we make sure that people can't negatively affect, we don't want players to be able to negatively affect others in VR, and it's more important in VR because, especially if you have more like a human avatar, because people can get in your personal space, and it's really upsetting. So it's important for anyone who's thinking about making a multiplayer VR game to consider harassment. So for us, we don't have a human body, we have an eagle body, but we did actually consider harassment. So you may notice that we don't have a voice chat in the game. And although voice chat would help a lot, we didn't have time to build the system that would actually allow you to ban and kick players if they were harassing. And so we felt it was more important to keep our players safe than to put in sort of a half-assed system. So just wrapping up, these are the main points. You want to make sure you get into multiplayer as quickly as possible. Play with as few players as you can get away with short rounds. You need to have some recovery time if your multiplayer is intense, but you need to give them something to do while they wait. And also, you can consider adding passive multiplayer as a way of bringing your community together, and just make sure that you consider harassment. Thanks.
All right. So, hi, my name is Niv Fisher, and I'm working on RAcademics with Hamsa. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we think we managed to create a little bit more intimacy between our players in multiplayer, And that's actually something we're kind of proud of, because we think it helped our community be very, very positive and avoid the usual toxicity that we see often in multiplayer games. And I'm going to point out a few things that I think contributed to that. So I'm going to start off by showing a little video. Instead of a trailer for the game, I'm going to show something we did in VRLA a couple of weeks ago. And we actually have a similar setup in the demo space here, so you're just welcome to come and check it out later. As we're short on time, I'm going to speak over this. So RAcademics is a sports game, a racquetball-inspired sports game that goes on in space. You're playing in a dome filled with hexagonal panels, and you need to hit the targets that appear on the hexagons with the ball using your racket. It has a single-player component and a multiplayer component, and it's very much a physical game like you would expect from a sports game. So all the nuances of your movement, the way you do your swing, you can apply spin to the ball, it's all taken into account, and there's a very deep learning skill curve as a result of that, so players can get much, much better. So it's a very much, it can be a competitive sport if we manage to grow the community to be big enough. I think it's very challenging at this stage of VR, but we're definitely aiming there.
I definitely have not felt that way toward.
So I'm going to start by speaking about a very early experience in development. Once we got the single player kind of fleshed out and we knew what the game was about, we immediately started working on multiplayer, because you want to do that as early as possible. And after building the first systems in, the synchronization between the players and voice chat, I actually fixed the final bugs that made the whole thing work from home, and I was eager to test it out. And I, called my colleague and said, like, log in and let's go into multiplayer. And we were both at home, and I'm in my shorts, and we're in multiplayer, chatting in VR, and we have the avatars, and we're looking at each other. And then I was about to reach and scratch my balls, sorry, and then I stopped myself because I felt like there's someone else with me. And even though it's only a single controller game, and my other hand wasn't even holding a controller. Like he would never know that I was scratching my balls. But I still stopped myself because I felt the presence of someone else with me, and my brain was so convinced that someone else is there that I didn't do it. I immediately started laughing, and I, of course, told him what happened. But that point made me realize, like, this feeling is something we want to capture and we want to amplify as much as we can in a game, because it's just so powerful. So what do you do? Sorry, let's go back here. What do you do to amplify that? What are the design choices that we made that we feel like contributed to that? So first thing to consider is player positioning. Of course, this is very much dependent on your actual game, but these are obvious things. Like, you don't want players too close to you, because then they're invading your personal space, and you actually feel that uncomfortable feeling of someone standing too close to you. But you also want them not too far, because you want to catch all their expressiveness of their avatars. You want to hear them well. You want to see what they're doing. We also had the luxury of having the players in a fixed relative position, so our multiplayer positions the players side by side, about 3 meters away. And that helps, because even though I'm not looking at the player, I kind of know where he is. It helps when I hear him speak, but even if I'm not looking and I'm doing something, I know that it's there because he's not moving around, so I know whenever I want to look at him, I can just turn my head and he's going to be right there. The other thing you want to do to help sell the feeling that that's a real person there is not to pop players in and out of existence. This is not something that happens in real life, of course, and actually, if you think about it, in real life, if you're alone and then someone comes in the door or knocks on the door or walks into your room, it completely changes the atmosphere of what's going on, right? I mean, it's not, when we're alone, we allow for different things, and when we are about to meet people, we sometimes, like, we get ready, we put our shirts, so it's something we need to prepare for. So give your players also time to prepare for another person to come and share a space with them. So we did something which is quite simple. We just did this animation of the player kind of teleporting in, and this gives the opportunity to say, okay, you're connected to someone, I know someone's coming, it's not going to surprise me, it's just going to appear right here and startle me. And it's a small thing, but I think it helped. The other thing is use expressive avatars. The reason is if something appears mechanical, then you think of it as mechanical. If something is lifelike, and if it's lifelike, and I'm saying that, and you're looking at our avatars, and they're completely mechanical. But what I'm referring to is the way they move. So if you look, we have like high fidelity tracking on the head and on this, and all the spine and the pelvis animation there is just generated automatically from the head position. But it gives a liveliness to the character, and it helps sell the feeling that someone is actually there. And also enables players to kind of like be silly, and like you're seeing here, and you know, convey their emotions. Actually, before there was a point in development where we had already released the build for Steam, and we started working on multiplayer, but there was no way for us developers to go into a multiplayer match and guarantee that we only connected to other developers. So we had this queue where we would put the controller on the head, so we would know we're a developer even before voice chat was on and before we saw the player names. So, so we knew if we can, you know, be silly with each other, or we're actually connecting to one of our players. Voice chat is, of course, a very big part of that. Obvious things, you must have it localized. You'll probably need to tweak it quite a bit to sound good, because if you're using voice compression or other things, it turns kind of like to negate some of the specialized, you know, specializations that's going on. So be ready to add reverb, tweak the loudness, and so on. And also take into account that some people will be uncomfortable speaking or listening to other people, so have like the mute buttons for voice chat in a very handy position. And of course, going back to the avatar expressiveness, we also use the audio cues to kind of like make a little speaking animation for our robot. It also helps sell the, you know, the feeling that someone's there, and so when he's talking, his head moves, and and it's in sync with the audio. The other thing that I want to talk about is sharing the game loop. So going from single player to multiplayer, we could have had both players, each with his own ball, with his own targets, and you know, doing their own thing. But what we ended up doing is sharing a single ball between two players and alternating the turns where the players play. And what that gives us is we're actually playing the same game. So when he's hitting the ball, I can experience him doing that. I can look at him and see what he's doing. I have that little interval of time where I can interact. I can maybe taunt. I can maybe yell to him like, "Nice shot," or something. And even though we were worried that the pacing would be different than the single player, and it might be too sparse or maybe a little bit boring in between, we actually find out that it's the complete opposite was true. It was just completely the right decision, because we are both doing the same thing. So we're looking at the same things, we're experiencing the same things. So if you have the opportunity, don't make your players, you know, each do their own things. Keep them focused on the same thing and share the game loop between both players. So here, yeah. So you can see, you can talk, and you can explain. So the first player says, "Are you ready?" And then you hit the ball. And the ball comes to the second player, and he's playing. And you can see how they're looking at each other and experiencing the same thing. So it helps enforce the feeling that we're doing. We are in here together. Other upsides of this downtime that we created in the game is that in VR, you actually takes a bit longer to soak in all the information that's being presented, because in traditional games, you're looking at the monitor and you're looking at a 2D projection of a 3D world or a 2D game, and it doesn't matter, and you have all your HUD elements all lined up, and you have all your UI there, and all the information is compressed into the screen, is available right there. But in VR, all the information is spread out all around you. So the targets can be here, and here, and here, and my opponent is there. So it takes longer, because I need to move my head, I need to look. It takes longer to absorb all this information. So this downtime, so to speak, is actually beneficial, because it gives me the time to do that and plan my next move before it's my turn again. And it's important to consider, because I think it's a non-obvious differentiator between traditional games and VR games, is that the environment is more lifelike, and it takes longer to absorb and take into account. Another thing that happens is, if you see, let me show this again. So you see this player doing a move which is not being taught anywhere, and it's not obvious, and also gives opportunity for other players to learn from players new things. If they're always busy in doing their game thing and so on, and they can't pay attention to the other player, they're not going to be able to learn from him. All right, so to wrap this up, I think from all the points I'm thinking, the benefits that we're really seeing from this is A, that players can learn from each other. B, it actually increases players' involvement and commitment, that co-presence feeling, that sharing of the game. It really reduces toxicity, because people are much less likely to, swear or be rude when they're feeling like they're right in front of a person, right? So people can flame on the internet behind their anonymity wall if they're tweeting or just posting on forums. But when they're actually feeling that someone is next to them, they're not going to be as rude, and they're not going to allow themselves to be as rude. So that's actually a benefit. And that co-presence feeling is very, very powerful. And that's the stuff we're hearing from our community all the time, that it just feels so good to be in a room with someone and just have a friendly match. Thank you. So we have a few minutes for questions. If you want to ask any of us, there's mics here and here.
I have a question about how do you think multiplayer and social interaction is going to work when people don't really have a keyboard anymore? So on traditional multiplayer games, the social barrier of communicating with either your team or your enemies is much lower. And where do you guys think that's going to go?
I don't know who the question was for, but...
So I don't think that the social barrier for communicating in a VR game is lower, because as soon as two people are next to each other, you're communicating. It's nonverbal, but gestures, things like that, you're immediately communicating the second that you see someone else in there. I think that there's going to be a lot more focus on nonverbal communication, fist bumps, all types of interpersonal interactions are going to be more the norm in the future. I think that because it's so novel, it's so cool to see someone and get to wave at them, that I think will be a huge reduction, actually, in the barrier of starting communication, because once you're waving at someone and once you're high-fiving them, I think it's much easier to start to talk with them as well.
I think once you embrace that you can't text chat anymore. You have voice chat if you want. You have a lot of expressiveness in the motion, so just use that.
Hi, my question is for Jonathan. So you talked about how at this stage it's a little bit too early to make enemies with your players, and that you value all of their feedbacks. Eventually, if VR multiplayer games do take off and you have a very, very big community, do you feel that it would, like this intention to really value your community feedback, do you think it will go down, or any thoughts on that?
I would say that my primary job at the moment is a community manager. Even though I spend every single day working on programming, the primary benefit that I provide the game at the moment is talking with the players and getting their feedback, and just kind of generally interacting with the community. I think that I will continue to do that as my primary goal in development. Whether or not I am no longer able to handle that as a single person, that may be the case. But I don't think that my intention of interacting with the community as it grows larger will diminish.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, this is for any of you. Did you have any particularly challenging aspects of building a multiplayer experience that, any stories of the big problems you guys experienced that you were able to overcome and make for a better experience overall?
No, it's very easy doing this. Anyone can do it. No. Where do I begin, man?
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's not. I think there's a huge barrier to entry of it. Learning multiplayer programming, like if you're going to be the programmer, that is a different skill set that I think you have to learn. As I mentioned, I think it's well worth the reward, but it's not easy to get into it. But you should definitely try it. Like if you're not sure, like download one of the Unity packages, use Unity networking. It's been upgraded quite recently, and it has a bunch of really cool stuff. Just play around with it and see. I promise, putting a headset on and doing multiplayer makes it so much more interesting than doing like standard game multiplayer. Just being able to stand in front of someone and wave at them is an amazing experience. So it's worth trying to do it.
Yeah, and what I would say the biggest challenge for us was synchronization issues.
Okay.
Like, what happens when someone shoots you and the messages sort of get crossed in the stream? Like, who wins? Like, does the person who thinks that they got shot, who thinks they didn't get shot win, or does the person who shot the person win? It's really dependent on every game. These synchronization issues have not been worked out for regular games, but it's often a lot more obvious in VR because you have that sense of presence and you know sort of much more viscerally whether or not something has touched you, and that affects also when you're dealing with objects. Say like I'm handing something in VR. Yeah. It's that sort of thing is huge, and you should. I mean, it's very important to try to find somebody who has experience with that if you're going to be making a multiplayer VR game.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome. I think we're kind of out of time. We're already a minute and a half past, but we'll be like here or there,
Right over
right
here.
there, and we're happy to take your questions there.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.